Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to your Thursday. It's June the 5th. This is Let's Talk Tropics, a short chat on the upcoming tropical weather conditions and if anything's going to be affecting us. But right now, things are nice and quiet as we're now in day 5 of hurricane season. We haven't had a whole lot of action try to get going. A little bit of a front that was over Florida and over the East Coast, still giving us some showers and thunderstorms there, and a couple of tropical waves that are moving across the Atlantic, but really very quiet when it comes to tropical weather on this Thursday morning. And it's relatively quiet across Acadiana, too. Our temperature right now at 88 degrees, but it feels more like 94 with that humidity at 59%. Dew points have been climbing back into the lower 70s. Our winds light out of the south at about 7 miles per hour, and the pressure holding at 30.02. And as we look at some of our traffic cameras here to kind of get a gauge on what the weather is elsewhere in the Acadiana region, at this point, it looks like everything is pretty dry with a mix of sun and clouds, and the roadways from Opelousas to Alexandria to Ambassador, Caffrey, and then over there to around the I-49. Everything looks okay right now. So let's go ahead and get into the radar. We do have a couple of isolated showers. Got a little rain there east of the LA-31 there near Parks. And then we've also got a little shower that's trying to pull its way here onto the Gulf Coast. I'll put this into motion real quick here so you can see kind of the direction of movement of where these thunderstorms are going. That is if this thing wants to go ahead and load in there. And you can see they're very quickly kind of lifting off toward the north. And I do think we're going to start to see a little bit more activity developing along the sea breeze here. I'll give it a couple of hours and we'll probably see a few more showers and thunderstorms starting to fire up, and we'll keep that rain chance today at about 30%. There's what it looks like elsewhere, though, where we've got some showers there in Florida, also through the Tennessee Valley, and then pushing across portions of northern Texas. Zonal flow for the most part in the upper levels here across the lower 48, but we've got a bit of a ridge in the upper levels over Texas and Louisiana, so that might help to suppress some of the lift with the showers and thunderstorms later today. And for those that are in the offshore waters, or maybe somebody's doing some boating out there today, the winds are fairly light out of the south at about 5 to 10 knots, and our seas running about 1 to 2 feet. So there's a look at your Gulf satellite, and again, most of the Gulf is nice and clear, but we still have that area where an old frontal boundary was draped here across Florida, and a bit maybe of a low pressure area that's trying to develop along that. We are seeing a little bit of low pressure kind of developing there, and then also another low trying to develop in that area. And a couple of days ago, the National Hurricane Center was watching that particular region for the possibility of some development. Although the chances were 10% or less, it's really the first blip we've had out there for the 2025 hurricane season. Now, down in Central America, there's not a whole lot going on, but you got the big Central American gyre that sits there, so you get that rotation around that kind of counterclockwise, and every once in a while you'll get some action out here in the Pacific that will kind of ride northward into the Gulf of Honduras and the western part of the Caribbean Sea, and you can sometimes get a tropical system going that way. And really the only other way during the early part of the season is you get low pressure to develop along a front, kind of like what we were seeing earlier this week there along the Florida Gulf Coast. So nothing happening right now with the Central American gyre, but as far as any tropical development here over the next several days, I think it's a better chance we're going to see something out here in the Pacific and then kind of move off toward the west. Now, that's for the next week to 10 days. After that, though, at least one model is showing some development there over the western part of the Caribbean. The rest of the Caribbean is kind of choked with some Saharan dust right now, but there's really no convection across the Caribbean or really the western Atlantic there. There's a bit of a frontal boundary that's still edging its way north of Puerto Rico, and some widely scattered showers there along the coast of South America there south of Trinidad. And then farther out in the Atlantic, we really don't have much out there. We had a bit of a tropical wave that came off the African coast a couple of days ago and just kind of fizzled out for the most part. But there is a lot of Saharan dust that's over the Atlantic, and there's even more that's now starting to push off there across the Cape Verde Islands. So with the stronger trade winds out there, with the wind shear and all this dust that's out here in the middle part of the Atlantic and the Caribbean, I wouldn't expect any tropical development there for the next several days. So the tropical weather outlook officially from the National Hurricane Center is showing no expected development here for the next 7 days. Now, we also got the update on the global tropics hazard outlook, which is week 2 and week 3. And remember last year, the week 3 was experimental and now it's operational. But you could see that in week 2 from June 11th through the 17th, there's a bit of a hot spot there, Western Caribbean, southern part of the Bay of Campeche, and the same kind of goes there in the Bay of Campeche in week 3 starting June 18th and going near to the end of the month. But you can see that the Pacific side looks like it's going to have a little bit more action here coming up in week 2 and week 3. Now, as far as our water temperatures are concerned, just about everybody in the June development zone, which would be the Gulf, the Western Caribbean, and the Western Atlantic near the Bahamas, all of those water temperatures are plenty warm enough to support tropical weather. Now, these temperatures that you're seeing here are in Celsius, but anything above 26.5 is the equivalent of 80-degree water. So anything that's in yellow or brighter can sustain tropical systems. Now, some of those temperatures, especially over the Gulf and the western part of the Atlantic, and particularly there over the western tip of Cuba, not only are the temperatures warm enough to support tropical activity, but they're above normal compared to this time of the year. You got a couple of cool spots there off the east coast of Florida and then over toward the Florida Keys, and central and eastern part of the Caribbean is also a little bit below normal when it comes to those water temperatures, but it's pretty insignificant. We're not seeing any serious cold water in those areas, so it's not going to take long for most of those regions to start to warm up. And even those areas over the central and eastern part of the Caribbean, even though it's below normal, those temperatures are already above that 26.5 degree temperature in the Celsius scale, or 80 degrees Celsius, or rather 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So even though we've got some slightly below normal temperatures, it's still warm enough to support tropical systems. And one other thing that we like to look at is the tropical cyclone heat potential. This is today's map. And not only does it measure the water temperature at the surface, but how deep those 80-degree waters go below the surface. And really a large part of the Western Caribbean has a lot of heat content, basically because that hot water goes a couple of 100 meters deep below the surface. So if a tropical system with the right atmospheric conditions were to move across these areas and tap into that heat content, then there's a possibility you can get something to strengthen. And a lot of times when you have high heat content and just the right atmospheric conditions, you can get rapid intensification of a tropical system that moves in that particular area. Now, there are several things that inhibit tropical development too, and one of those is wind shear. And wind shear is basically defined as the difference between the winds in the lower levels of the atmosphere and the higher levels of the atmosphere. And in this particular map, it's measuring the winds at 250 millibars, which is quite high in the atmosphere, and 850 millibars, which is down a little bit closer to the surface. Anything that's shaded in yellow and red there, like over the eastern part of the Gulf, much of the western part of the Caribbean, and getting out east of the islands and out into the Atlantic, we've got high wind shear. So that would be an inhibiting factor when it comes to any tropical development. And the reason is tropical systems, when they're just starting to form, need to get their center vertically stacked. And once it's vertically stacked and it's not being affected by wind shear at different levels of the atmosphere, it can organize a lot easier, especially a developing tropical system. If there's a lot of wind shear, a developing tropical system gets blown apart and either just does nothing or it is a very weak type of system. Wind shear will also affect storms that have already formed, and you've heard that in the past, that if wind shear starts to affect one side of a storm, it can kind of get it off balance, or you don't get that symmetrical look of a tropical system, and at the same time, the stack in the middle, the eye of the hurricane, or the center of the tropical storm, isn't vertically stacked. It's more diagonal, so your surface low might be in a different place than where the circulation is a little bit higher up. And when you have that, you don't get anything to strengthen anytime quickly. Saharan dust, as I showed you, covers a large part of the Atlantic Ocean. That is one of the other inhibiting factors. And when you have a lot of Saharan dust like that, it kind of chokes things down, so you don't get a whole lot of development when the Saharan dust is like this. But it tends to weaken quite a bit as we get into August, and the same goes with the wind shear, and that's why you have more hurricanes as you go into August and September. So let's start with the GFS model, and the GFS has actually been consistent beyond 10 days. I'm only showing you 10 days here, but beyond 10 days, I will have to say that the GFS has been pretty consistent of trying to develop something in that particular area from model run to model run to model run, I would say for the last 2 or 3 days or so. And in one case, one model run was actually showing a low here and a low here, so maybe 2 different systems. But again, that's beyond the 10 days that I'm showing you here. Now, you do see some moisture gathering here around Central America and maybe a little bit of a low pressure area, but it does tend to show more of the action going over into the Pacific. And we talked about that just a little bit earlier when it comes to the Central American gyre. The Euro model did show a little blip about a week ago over parts of the Gulf of Mexico, but since then it has not really been showing anything to develop. I am seeing a little bit more moisture starting to gather there over Central America as you get out to day 10, but there's really nothing showing up there other than the Bermuda high over the Atlantic, shoving a lot of that moisture westward across the Caribbean and eventually across Central America and out into the Pacific Ocean, where it would have a better chance for development. Canadian model, which is just hot off the presses, is very similar to what we're seeing with the European model. You get a little bit of a low pressure area there over the southern part of the Caribbean Ocean, but all of that kind of drifts its way over Central America. And if you look there for that whole loop, the Canadian model is actually showing 2 different low pressure areas there along the coast of Mexico, but that's going to be on the Pacific side. Again, really not much of a concern for us here along the Gulf Coast. And finally, we'll finish off with the ICON model. The ICON model only goes out 7 days, so we can't give you quite that extended forecast like with the Euro and the GFS, which both go out 16 days. The GFS goes out 16 days for every run, and the Euro model goes out 16 days every other run. So you got to kind of look at that when it comes to the Euro model, but all 4 models really aren't showing a whole lot with the exception of the GFS, but it's been the most robust on tropical development here over the last several days. But where it's trying to get things developing is a typical area during the month of June. The Gulf of Mexico, the Yucatan Channel, and also the western part of the Atlantic are those are kind of the hot spots when it comes to tropical development during the month of June. But remember, because of the Saharan dust and the high wind shear, generally June and July don't show a lot of tropical systems. Generally, on average, in June we have 2, and in July we have about 1 or 2. But then by August and September we average 4 named storms, October averages 3, and November averages 2. And that comes out to a total of 14 over the course of the hurricane season for an average. And the early season predictions from Colorado State, NOAA, and others are still showing maybe somewhere between 15 and 19 tropical systems that get names over the course of the year. So above normal, but not quite as robust as the early season forecasts that were coming out during the 2024 season. So some of the numbers might be a little bit down compared to what we were seeing over the past several years. And part of that is because La Nina isn't really showing up in the extended models. And also at the same time, those water temperatures are a little bit cooler than where they were last year. So hopefully we'll see a little less activity than what we've seen over the past couple of years. Also, be hurricane ready. And I told everybody who watched the show yesterday, if you can take one line of this graphic and get those by the end of the weekend, you're going to be ahead of most people. Batteries, flashlights, water, non-perishable foods. Make sure your first aid kit is stocked up. Make sure you've got extra medicine, personal hygiene, and cleaners. And then, of course, take all of your important papers, insurance, and IDs. Take pictures of those and save them on your phone, but then also have the physical papers with you if you do indeed evacuate. And make sure you got a basic toolkit if you're staying at home. Also, entertainment for the kids and pet supplies. And if you want, there is a meeting that's going to be happening at the Slyman Theater in New Iberia. I'll be speaking as well as several others as we get ready for the 2025 hurricane season. You can learn some safety tips. You can learn about evacuation routes. and also some of the experiences that some of us have had during tropical weather. Last year, we talked to the Beauregard Parish Sheriff after Hurricane Laura had come through in 2020 and how devastating that was. So it is a pretty interesting thing. That starts at 5:30 at the Slyman Theater on historic Main Street in New Iberia. It's Parish Prepared 2025, the Community Emergency Response Team with the Iberia Parish Government and Volunteer Louisiana. Well, I hope you enjoy Acadiana weather today and Let's Talk Tropics. If you do, like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. You can hear my forecasts on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And then also follow my social media pages both on Facebook and X. And thanks to everyone who has subscribed to Acadiana Weather Today right here on YouTube. If you have subscribed, make sure you turn that notification icon on, and that way you know when the morning forecast hits at about 7 o'clock on weekday mornings and when Let's Talk Tropics airs live at noon each weekday. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Hopefully, I'll see you at the Slyman Theater later this evening over in New Iberia. Until then, I'll see you on Friday morning.